Ladies and gentlemen of the Atheist, Archbishop Max. As always, thank you for inviting me. I can think of no better way to spend Darwin Day than to be discussing the future of the Catholic Church in a Protestant university. I'm going to argue here that in the long run the Catholic Church cannot be salvaged, and it's nothing to do with the outrageous criminal offences that they've committed against children around the world, or the outrageous cover-up of those crimes by the Catholic hierarchy. I think that's hastened their demise, but it would have happened anyway. And it's nothing to do with who happens to be Pope. I think that Pope Benedict isn't as bad as the media portrayed him, and Pope Francis isn't as good as the media portrayed him. Pope Benedict is not an evil monster simply because he's a James Bond villain smile. And Pope Francis is not a superhero simply because he can tie his own laces and walk across the road by himself. But neither Pope, despite their different media images, has done a tap to change the theology of the Church in the important areas. Pope Benedict may believe genuinely that he has done a lot to stop child abuse within the Catholic Church, but he hasn't taken the obvious moral step of realising that dealing with rapists is a job for the police. Pope Francis may believe genuinely that he is being more compassionate to gay people by talking more gently about them, but he hasn't changed the theology of the Church that being gay is an intrinsic moral evil. But regardless of who the Pope is, and regardless of their outrageous crimes, the reason that the Catholic Church doesn't have a future in the long term is because of world demographics and internal Catholic Church demographics. And the world demographics are based on the World Values Survey, which is an ongoing research by a team of interdisciplinary social scientists around the year for the past 25 or more years, where they've been measuring human values in a scientific way in different countries, and they're discovering that two sets of values dominate the picture. That when individuals are focused on survival values, then societies have traditional religious values. And when investment in education and health and communications technology and democracy enable individuals to move from survival values towards self-expression values, then societies move from traditional religious values towards secular rational values. And that is happening throughout the world at different speeds and different places, with the slight exception of Africa, which is slower. Individuals are moving towards self-expression values and societies are moving towards secular rational values. And if you compare that with the internal demographics of the Catholic Church, and you realise that in 1900, when there were about 680 million Catholics in the world, 3/4 of them lived in the global north, mostly Europe and North America. By 2000, when there were 1.1 billion Catholics in the world, 2/3 of those Catholics lived in the global south, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa. That's where the Catholic Church is demographically at the moment. And by the year 2050, it is estimated that 3/4 of the members of the Catholic Church will be based in the global south. Which, by the way, is kind of like, it's not necessarily a geographical term, it's a shorthand for a type of society, some parts of which may be geographically in the north, but that's the type of society. And that's where the Catholic Church is. And it creates a huge dilemma for the Catholic Church centrally, because it has to respond simultaneously to two entirely different sets of values. You have the global north, where to even most Catholics, the theology of the Catholic Church is seen as increasingly implausible, to downright silly. If you take a poll in Ireland recently, around the time of the Eucharistic Congress, it showed that 75% of Irish Catholics don't believe in transubstantiation, which is one of the core values of the Catholic Church. It's one of the things that differentiates Catholicism from Protestantism. 50% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in hell. 15% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And my personal favourite, 8% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in God. Which I would have thought was a fairly low hurdle for being a Roman Catholic. Now, if you take that alone, and then aside from that, in terms of the Catholic Church's moral position, most Catholics in the global north just don't take the moral teachings of the Roman Catholic Church seriously. They are, the traditional a la carte Catholics. They use their own conscience, as normal people do, and base their conscience on compassion and empathy and justice and reciprocity and cooperation and fairness, and not on what somebody wrote in a book 2,000 years ago. Particularly on the basis that somebody believes that the creator of the universe was dictating the book to them. So, but simultaneously you have a small minority in global northern Catholic terms, of Catholics who are still promoting a conservative, traditional Catholic ideology. We've seen it here in Ireland recently with John Waters and the Iona Institute. But it's far wider than that. What's happening is, as Catholicism becomes less sustainable because of its internal contradictions in the global north, Catholics have two ways of approaching it. Either they can become more secular by accommodating the advances of science in terms of claims of reality and the advances of secular democracy in terms of claims of morality, or they can reject those developments and they can become more fundamentalist. And that's what some people are doing, a minority, but they are still there. Now, if you contrast that to the global south is much simpler to analyse. And the reason it's much simpler to analyse is it hasn't had the economic development and the subsequent move towards secular rationalism that we've had in the global north. And so the Catholic Church in the global south is far more likely to be biblical literalist, is far more likely to be superstitious, is far more likely to believe in miracles and witchcraft and possessions and exorcisms, is far more likely to be very conservative on sexual matters, in terms of abortion, in terms of gay rights, in terms of contraception, in terms of divorce. It's far more likely to be more progressive in terms of social justice issues, like the environment and war and peace and race and free market capitalism. And so that's happening. That is what Roman Catholicism is at the moment. It's not us sitting in this room here. That is where between 2/3 and 3/4 of Roman Catholics live. That is the ideology of Roman Catholicism. And frightening though it may seem to us, and bizarre though it may seem to us, the Iona Institute reflect Roman Catholic teaching and Roman Catholic thinking around the world far more than the liberal Catholics who oppose them in Ireland. That's a frightening thought, but that is the truth of the matter. And so what you have for the Catholic Church, you've seen this also being played out in the Anglican Church at the moment, where in the Anglican Church there's a battle for gay rights in terms of both gay unions and gay bishops. And that has been played out on the same fault lines. It is the Anglicans from the sort of global north that are supporting these developments, and it's the Anglicans from the global south that are opposing these developments. And the same fault lines are there in the Catholic Church. Now, they're kind of hidden in the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church isn't a democracy. But they're still there, and the Catholic Church is going to have to address them. And how is it going to address them? Well, I suggest that there are 4 possible ways for the Catholic Church to try to address these fault lines. The first option that it has is it can decentralise theologically and have different, let people believe different things in the north and south. Now, it can't do that because that goes against the whole core of Catholicism. So they're not going to do that. It can try to continue its current policy of continued centralisation of theology, but saying different things in different places. That's what they've done all along. They've been the Fianna Fáil of religion. And the way they've operated that successfully, from the start, from the Bible, if you take the Bible the way Paul describes it as being all things to all men. And that's what they're trying to do. The first example in the Bible was Paul when he was trying to convert people, and they understandably, being grown, sensible adults, didn't want to be circumcised. And he was explaining that they had to be. Eventually, he did a deal with the Jesus disciples that converts didn't have to be circumcised, but Jewish Christians did. Which reminds me of my favourite joke about Catholicism, which is Paul going back to the converts with news of that deal and saying, "I've got good news and I've got bad news. Good news is you get to keep your foreskins. The bad news is you're not allowed to touch them." But they're not going to get away with that anymore, because you're in a world now where that kind of double talk won't work with instant communications, with global communications. So they've essentially got 2 options left. They can try to salvage the global north and lose the south, but they won't get away with that because the southern majority won't let them. Or they can try to build in the global south and lose the global north, which is what I suspect that they will do. But their difficulty there, if they do that, is that as well as losing their influence in the north, they will only maintain their influence in the south for so long as the global south remains underdeveloped. And once the global south becomes developed, then they will lose their influence there as well. And unlike Islam, which imposes its religion by force, they're not going to be able to do that, so they will that be just a normal religion. And if the global south does not develop, then they are just another religion in just another part of the world, and they will just have to learn to live with that like the rest of the religions. On the basis of all of those arguments, I oppose the motion. Thank you.